The sound of a deadbolt sliding home is a specific kind of violence. It is the metallic click of your own world shrinking until it fits inside a single room. I stood on the hallway carpet, the fibers worn thin by 30 years of my own footsteps, and listened to the tumblers fall into place. On the other side of the white paneled door, my son David sighed, a heavy, theatrical exhale meant to convey the terrible burden of caring for a man who had once carried him on his shoulders. "Don't go in the basement, Dad," David said through the wood. His voice wasn't angry. It was worse. It was soft, curdled with a patronizing sweetness that made my stomach turn. It was the tone you use when explaining to a toddler why they cannot touch the stove. "The stairs are steep, Arthur, and I told you last week there's black mold spreading near the sump pump." I stared at the brass knob, my hands trembling, not from age and not from fear, but from the sheer effort of keeping them at my sides instead of pounding on the wood. "I understand, David," I said, pitching my voice to sound thin and reedy. I added a slight wet cough for effect. I thought I left my old photo albums down there." "I moved those to storage, Dad, for safekeeping," David replied instantly. The lie came through the door so smoothly it almost had texture. "Go rest your legs." "All right," I said, shuffling my feet against the floorboards to simulate the gait of a man defeated by gravity. I waited until I heard his footsteps retreat down the hall, heavy and confident. I waited until I heard him enter the kitchen and say something to his wife Sheila, followed by her sharp, dismissive laughter. Only then did I straighten my spine. The shuffle vanished. My eyes, which I kept half-lidded in their presence to suggest fatigue, snapped open, scanning the hallway of a house I had built with my own hands in 1995. Black mold. It was an insult to my craftsmanship. I had poured that foundation myself. I had installed the French drains and the vapor barriers. There wasn't a spore of mold in that basement, and we both knew it. But truth doesn't matter when you are 82 years old and your family has successfully convinced the world that your mind is a sieve. I walked quietly back to the guest room, the in-law suite, they called it. I sat in the beige recliner that wasn't mine and picked up a book I wasn't reading. My name is Arthur Vance. For 40 years, I was one of the most respected antique appraisers and historians on the East Coast. I could spot a fake Chippendale from across a crowded auction hall. I could tell you the provenance of a diamond by the way it cut the light. But I couldn't spot the fraud living in my own house until it was too late. After my wife Eleanor passed, the silence in the house became deafening. That's when David and Sheila swooped in. They were struggling, they said. David had been between opportunities for 2 years. "They suggested they move in to help me manage the estate. It sounded like salvation. It was an invasion. They told me my pension wasn't covering the property taxes. They told me I was forgetting things, important things, like paying bills or turning off the stove. I believed them. God help me, I believed them because I wanted to trust the boy I raised. I wanted to believe that the son who used to cry when he scraped his knee wasn't capable of looking me in the eye and lying about my own life. If you are listening, if you have a gut feeling that your family is smiling to your face while sharpening a knife behind your back, listen to that instinct. Don't push it down. Don't make the mistake I did. Don't wait until you are a prisoner in your own home to look for the key. Betrayal doesn't start with a bang. It starts with a whisper, a missing watch, a locked door. At 2 p.m., the front door opened. David shouted from the foyer, "I have that interview downtown. Sheila's coming for moral support." "Good luck, son," I called back, injecting a tremor into my voice. I watched through the sheer curtains as they walked to the driveway. They weren't taking David's beat-up sedan. They were getting into a brand-new obsidian black Mercedes S-Class. When I had asked about it last week, Sheila told me it was a loaner from a wealthy friend while their car was in the shop. A loaner. I watched them pull away, the sun glinting off the chrome, looking like royalty leaving the palace. As soon as the tail lights vanished around the bend, the performance dropped. I stood up. I didn't groan. I didn't wobble. I walked to the hallway with the purpose of a man who had spent a lifetime hunting for hidden treasures. I stopped at the basement door. Mold, I whispered to myself. The lock was a standard quick-set pen tumbler. Cheap, insulting. David evidently didn't think his senile father retained the dexterity for lockpicking. I pulled a straightened paper clip and a small tension wrench I had fashioned from a discarded soda tab out of my pocket. I inserted the tools. I felt the pins. 1, 2, click, 3, click. 12 seconds. That's all it took to bypass their security. I turned the knob. It opened silently. The air that rushed up to me wasn't damp. It didn't smell of mildew or earth. It smelled of cedar, climate-controlled dry air, and expensive leather. I stepped onto the landing and flipped the switch. The lights didn't flicker. They hummed to life instantly. New track lighting I hadn't installed. I descended the stairs, my heart hammering against my ribs. It wasn't the exertion. It was the dread. It was the terrible anticipation of confirming what my gut had been screaming for months. I reached the bottom step and froze. It wasn't a basement. It was a showroom. My breath caught in my throat, a ragged gasp that sounded too loud in the quiet room. They had finished the walls, installed plush carpeting, and set up professional display racks. And there, meticulously arranged under halogen lights, was my life. My watches, I whispered, walking toward a glass display case in the center of the room. David had told me I lost them. He said I had left my vintage Rolex Submariner at the park on a bench. He said my Patek Philippe had been stolen by a cleaning lady I barely remembered hiring. But there they were, polished, sitting on velvet pillows. Little white tags hung from their bands. $18,500. $42,000. I turned to the walls. Last winter, David claimed a pipe burst and ruined Eleanor's collection of 19th century landscape paintings. He said he had thrown them out to save me the heartbreak of seeing them destroyed. They were hanging on the far wall, framed in new gallery-quality molding. Stickers on the bottom right corners read, "Sold, shipped to London." I walked through the aisles of my own stolen history. Boxes of my rare first edition books were stacked waist-high, taped up and labeled with shipping manifests for buyers in Hong Kong, Dubai, and New York. They hadn't just been stealing from me to pay the bills. I felt a wave of nausea so potent I had to grab the edge of a desk to steady myself. That's when I saw it. The desk was new, mahogany. On top of it sat a laptop and a leather-bound ledger. I sat in the office chair, the leather groaning under my weight. My hand shook as I opened the ledger. It was in David's handwriting. He had always had terrible penmanship, but this was legible enough. Inventory log, August 2024. I scanned the columns. Item, estimated value, buyer, status. Then my eyes drifted to the bottom of the page. There was a section titled Projected Timeline. Asset Liquidation Phase 1 complete. Asset Liquidation Phase 2 in progress. Subject expiration target October 14th. I froze. October 14th? That was next month. Next to the date, there was a scribbled note. Policy renewal deadline. DNR forgery complete. Dr. Evans on board. The room spun. They weren't just waiting for nature to take its course. They were banking on it. I wasn't a father to them. I wasn't a human being. I was inventory with an expiration date. They had pre-sold the house I was standing in. I saw the closing documents stacked under the ledger, with a transfer date set for 30 days after my projected passing. A sound tore through the silence. Rumble. The garage door, directly above me. My head snapped up. They were back. It had only been 40 minutes. The interview must have been a lie, or perhaps they forgot something. Panic, cold and sharp, flared in my chest. If David found me down here, looking at this ledger, if he found me, October 14th might become today. Move, Arthur, I hissed to myself. I pulled my burner phone, a cheap flip phone I kept hidden in a hollowed-out Bible in my room, from my pocket. My fingers, usually so steady, fumbled with the camera. I snapped a photo of the ledger. I snapped a photo of the watches. Footsteps above. The heavy thud of the door from the garage to the kitchen opening. David's voice boomed from the top of the house. I scrambled up from the chair. I shoved the chair back to its original position. I grabbed the paperclip from the lock on the display case where I had rested it. He was moving toward the hallway. I rushed to the stairs. My 82-year-old knees screamed in protest, a sharp, grinding pain that shot up my thighs. But adrenaline is a powerful anesthetic. I took the stairs 2 at a time, silent as a shadow. I reached the top of the landing just as I heard David's footsteps hit the hardwood of the hallway. I pulled the door shut. I jammed the paperclip into the lock, twisting it frantically to re-engage the deadbolt. Click. I slid the paperclip into my pocket and shuffled, fast, breathless, across the hall to the guest room. I threw myself into the recliner and grabbed the newspaper from the side table. I didn't even have time to check if it was right side up. The door to my room pushed open. David stood there. He was wearing his interview suit, but his tie was loosened. He looked flushed, agitated. He scanned the room, his eyes darting to my chest, checking my breathing. Is asked? There was an edge to his voice, suspicion. I lowered the paper, forcing my hand to tremble. I blinked slowly, looking at him with watery, confused eyes. "I'm here, son," I rasped. I forced a wet cough, hacking into my fist. I must have dozed off. David didn't answer immediately. He stepped into the room. He sniffed the air. I prayed the sin of the basement, that distinct cedar smell, wasn't clinging to my cardigan. He walked over to me, smiling that shark-like smile that didn't reach his eyes. He put a hand on my shoulder. His grip was tight, too tight. "Just checking," he said softly. "I thought I heard something. You didn't go wandering, did you?" I looked him dead in the eye. I channeled every ounce of discipline I had learned in 40 years of staring down hustlers and con artists. I let my jaw slacken slightly. "No, son," I whispered. "Too many stairs." David studied my face for a second longer, searching for a crack in the mask. Then the tension left his shoulders. He patted me, a condescending rhythm. Pat, pat, pat. "Good," he said. "That's good. Stay in the chair, Dad. I'm going to pour myself a drink." "You deserve it," I said. He turned and walked away, heading toward the kitchen to drink scotch that I had bought in 1998, pouring it into a crystal glass that belonged to my grandfather. I watched the back of his head as he retreated. I waited until he was out of sight. Then I slowly folded the newspaper and placed it on my lap. The trembling in my hand stopped. The confusion left my eyes. I looked at the empty doorway, and I felt a profound, hollow silence open up inside my chest. It was the space where my love for my son used to be. The father in me had died the moment I read that date in the ledger. The man sitting in the chair was no longer Arthur Vance, the loving patriarch. I was Arthur Vance, the appraiser. I looked at the house around me. I looked at the sun in the kitchen. And for the first time in my life, I finished my appraisal with 0 hesitation. Value, 0. Invisibility is a heavy coat to wear, especially when you are wearing it inside the home you built with your own hands. For 2 weeks, I had been a ghost haunting the hallways of 442 Oak Lane. I moved like smoke, silent and unobtrusive, perfecting the shuffle of a man whose joints were calcifying and whose mind was unraveling. I played the part of the dying patriarch so well that I almost fooled myself in the mirror. I complained of fatigue. I let my hand tremble violently whenever I lifted a fork to my mouth, forcing David to sigh and look away in disgust. I asked him to repeat himself 3-4 times a day, watching the patience drain from his eyes like water from a cracked vessel. This performance was my armor. It made them careless. It made them arrogant. Tonight was the culmination of their arrogance. I sat in the beige recliner in the guest room, listening to the house buzz with activity. It was 7:30 p.m. For the last 3 hours, caterers had been moving in and out of the kitchen, carrying trays of hors d'oeuvres, paid for with the liquidation of my coin collection. "Stay in your room tonight, Dad," David had told me earlier, adjusting his silk tie in the hallway mirror without looking at me. "We have some important people coming over, networking, you know how it is. I don't want you getting overstimulated. And please, try to keep the coughing down." "I understand, son," I had whispered, clutching my chest. "I'll just—" "Good," he had said, checking his watch, my watch, the vintage Omega I had supposedly lost. "We'll bring you a plate later." Now, the house was filling up, but these weren't friends. Through the crack in my door, I saw them arriving. Men in sharp suits with eyes that darted around, assessing value, not hospitality. Women dripping in jewelry that looked suspiciously like pieces missing from other estates. These were high-end fences, black market collectors, and shadow brokers. They were vultures in tuxedos, here to pick the meat off my bones before I was even cold. I wasn't sleeping. I was waiting. I reached under the mattress of the guest bed. My hand brushed against the cold garment bag I had hidden there 3 days ago, retrieved during a clandestine meeting with Frank. Frank was my lifeline. We had met on a park bench while I was supposedly feeding the ducks, a fragile old man tossing bread crusts. In reality, I was handing over a flash drive containing every photo, every ledger page, and every recording I had gathered from the basement. Frank, a retired forensic accountant with a jaw like a bulldog, had looked at the data and whistled low and long. "Arthur," he had said, his voice grim, "they aren't just thieves, they're amateurs."
The paper trail is a highway. I've built a dossier that would make a district attorney salivate. We have the bank transfers, the insurance fraud evidence, and the proof of the forged deed. "No," I had told him, watching a mallard fight for a piece of bread. "Not yet. Legal revenge takes time, Frank. It's sterile. It happens in quiet rooms with lawyers. I need something immediate. They are selling my dignity tonight. I need to shatter their social standing before the law takes their freedom." "The party," Frank had realized, nodding slowly. "The party," I confirmed. "Have the police there at 8:45 p.m. Now it was 8:15 p.m. I stood up from the recliner. The tremor in my hands vanished. The stoop in my shoulders straightened. I stripped off the stained pajamas they like to see me in. I opened the garment bag. Inside was my tuxedo, a midnight blue bespoke suit I hadn't worn since Eleanor's funeral. It fit perfectly. I fastened the cufflinks, gold knots Eleanor had given me for our 40th anniversary. I slicked back my white hair. I looked in the mirror. I didn't see a victim. I saw Arthur Vance, the man who could tell a forgery from a masterpiece at 50 paces. I picked up my tablet. He had bragged about the system for weeks, never realizing that I had read the manual while he was out spending my money. From the living room, a voice boomed. It wasn't David. It was Gregor, a slimy auctioneer known in the underground circuit for moving stolen estates. "Ladies and gentlemen," Gregor's voice carried through the thin walls, "thank you for joining us on this exquisite evening. We have a rare collection tonight, liberated from the estate of the late Arthur Vance. A ripple of laughter moved through the house. It was a wet, ugly sound. That laughter was the final seal on their fate. It washed away the last lingering doubt in my heart. Lot number 1, Gregor announced. A diamond necklace, mid-century, flawless clarity. I opened the bedroom door. The hallway was empty. The noise was concentrated in the living room. I walked down the corridor, my dress shoes clicking rhythmically on the hardwood. Click, click, click. The sound of judgment approaching. I reached the archway of the living room. The scene was grotesque. 50 people stood holding crystal flutes of my champagne. David was standing on the raised hearth of the fireplace, holding Eleanor's necklace up to the light. He looked drunk, drunk on champagne, drunk on greed, drunk on the illusion that he had gotten away with it. Sheila was by his side, beaming, wearing a dress that cost more than my first car. A scream, a man in the back shouted. David asked, grinning. Come on, this piece is worth $80. My mother barely wore it. I stepped into the light. I believe that belongs to me, I said. My voice was not a rasp. It was not a whisper. It was a command, projected from the diaphragm, the voice I used to silence auction houses in New York and London. The room went deathly silent.
It happened in an instant, as if I had sucked the oxygen out of the air. David dropped his hand. The necklace dangled from his fingers, swinging like a pendulum. His face drained of color, turning a sickly shade of gray. Sheila froze mid-sip, the glass halfway to her mouth, her eyes bulging. The guests turned. They expected to see a confused, senile old man in pajamas. Instead, they saw a patriarch in a tuxedo, standing tall, his eyes cold and clear as jagged ice. David stammered, his voice cracked. You should be in bed. You're confused. He tried to laugh, looking around at the guests. My father, he has dementia. He has these episodes. He thinks he's at a gala. I am perfectly lucid, David, I replied, walking into the center of the room. The guests parted like the Red Sea, backing away from me as if I were radioactive. And I am not confused. I am assessing the value of the room. Sheila shrieked, looking around for the hired muscle. Sit down, Sheila, I snapped. The authority in my voice made her knees buckle. She sat on the arm of the sofa. I tapped my tablet. The giant 80-inch screen behind David, which had been displaying a looping video of a digital fireplace, flickered. The fire vanished. In its place, a high-resolution photo appeared. It was the basement, the racks of stolen clothes, the boxes of books labeled for Hong Kong. Gasps filled the room. The buyers began to murmur. A man in the front row asked. This, I said, scrolling to the next image, is the black mold my son warned me about. The screen changed again. This time, it showed the ledger. I zoomed in on the entry next to my name. Subject expiration. Target, October 14th. And this, I said, pointing to the screen, is my expiration date. My son and his wife have pre-sold the house you are standing in, with a closing date contingent on my death next month. The room erupted. People began to put down their glasses. They began to inch toward the door. They realized they weren't at a party. They were at a crime scene. Sheila screamed, jumping up and grabbing David's arm. He's senile. He photoshopped these. He's crazy. David looked at me, his eyes wild. Dad, stop this. You don't know what you're doing. We were organizing it for you. I asked. I tapped the screen again. A photo of the Rolex David was currently wearing appeared, tagged with a price of $18,500 in the ledger. David instinctively covered his wrist. David shouted to the room. Play audio file 3, I said calmly to the room at large. I pressed the button on the tablet. The surround sound speakers, The ones David had bragged about for weeks boomed with crystal clarity. Once the old bastard kicks it next month, we dump the body at the crematorium and hit the Maldives. He's worth more dead than alive. Just make sure the pills are crushed into his applesauce. It was David's voice, unmistakable, arrogant, cruel. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. It pressed down on the room like a physical weight. David looked at the guests. He looked at the floor. Then, slowly, he looked at me. There was no love in his eyes. There was no regret. There was only panic, the raw, animal panic of a trapped rat. "Dad, please," he whispered, taking a step toward me. His hands were shaking. "We can explain. It was just talk, venting, stress. You know how it is." I repeated. The words tasted like ash in my mouth. "You love my portfolio. You love my house." "No," Sheila sobbed, mascara running down her face. "Arthur, please." "There is nothing to explain," I said, checking my watch again. "My associate, Frank, delivered this evidence and the recording of you plotting my murder to the police 1 hour ago." As if on cue, the room was washed in a strobe of red and blue light through the bay windows. The wail of sirens cut through the night air. The front door burst open. "Police!" Uniformed officers flooded the space. The buyers scattered, dropping champagne glasses that shattered on the hardwood. But the police weren't interested in them. They moved with precision toward the fireplace. "David Vance, Sheila Vance," an officer barked, pulling handcuffs from his belt. I watched as they were slammed against the wall. I watched the cold steel click around David's wrists. I watched Sheila collapse, screaming, her expensive dress bunching up around her as she was dragged to her feet. David was crying now, ugly, heaving sobs. He looked at me, his face a mask of terror. "Dad, please," he screamed. "Tell them it's a mistake. I'm your son. I'm your boy." The officer spun him around to march him out. As they dragged him past me, he locked eyes with me one last time. He looked small. He looked pathetic. He looked like a stranger. "Dad!" he screamed again, his voice breaking. I looked at him with a calm, detached sorrow. I didn't feel anger anymore. I didn't feel hate. I felt the profound emptiness of a debt settled. My son died the day he decided to sell my death for a vacation, I said softly. The officers hauled them out into the night. The guests fled, leaving the front door wide open. The cold night air drifted in, chasing away the smell of cheap perfume and greed. The house emptied. The police took the evidence, bagging the ledger, the laptop, the jewelry. Frank walked in a moment later, nodding to me from the doorway. He didn't say anything. He didn't have to. The silence returned to the house, but it was different now. It wasn't the heavy, suffocating silence of a prison. It was the clean, crisp silence of a sanctuary. I walked to the table where a bottle of Dom Perignon sat in a bucket of melting ice. It was a bottle from my private collection, one I had saved for a special occasion. I poured myself a glass. The bubbles hissed softly. I took a sip. It was cold, crisp, and perfect. I was alone. My wife was gone. My son was gone. I was an 82-year-old man in a tuxedo in an empty house. But I was not lonely. I had my dignity. I had my home. I had my life back. I looked toward the basement door, standing slightly ajar in the hallway. I didn't need to lock it anymore. I didn't need to worry about what was down there. The monsters beneath the floorboards were gone for good. And for the first time in 3 years, I wasn't waiting to die. I was just living.